Now, let's get into this. Here we go. In an attempt to capture the... Now, this is the story. We're from the beginning, and we're starting here. So here we go. In an attempt to capture the Mothra egg that was found at the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters, the terrorists break into a new Monarch facility built to incubate the egg. Due to low security, Dr. E.T.N and Houston Brooks release the egg into the ocean in a desperate attempt to keep it out of the terrorists' hands after intelligence found that Jonah bought the last remaining Ghidorah egg. Dr. Chen and Brooks escape and begin to track the egg. When realizing that the course of the egg is set to land on Skull Island, Brooks and Chen call Mark Russell and ask him to help them prepare a plan to deal with the wildlife on the island. Dr. Brooks gives Mark a crash course of some of the animals and monsters they encountered there during his last trip. Mark reluctantly brings Madison with him as he fears that leaving her on her own may put her in a position to be kidnapped and used as leverage by the terrorists. Alexander Skarsgård, who's casted in the movie, and his team are hired by Monarch as security and tactical detail on the island. All roads lead to Skull Island as Monarch, now finding out, is led by Rebecca Hall, who's also casted. We don't know who she is yet. Like I said, these are fillers for now. And Dr. Chen, Dr. Brooks, Mark, and Madison Russell, along with the hired mercenaries, are in a rush to retrieve the Mothra egg, but so are the terrorists. They are also tracking all the Titans as they also are heading for Skull Island. Dr. Houston Brooks has a conversation. Whoops. Real quick.
Zombie Custom Maps Super Chatted $1.99. Could you check my previous Super Chat?
Yeah, Zombie. Let me just get through this and then I'll go back and I'll check it out, okay? Where were we? They're also tracking all the Titans as they are also heading to Skull Island. Dr. Houston Brooks has a conversation with Mark telling him about the Hollow Earth theory and that he believes that a much larger and more powerful Skullcrawler lays dormant underneath the island, and that he believes Lieutenant Hank Marlowe may have been wrong about the Skullcrawler that Kong defeated in the 70s being the last and bigger of the bunch. Mothra's egg lands on the coast of Skull Island with no indication of hatching, but is in immediate danger as a giant Mother Longlegs begins to try and breach the egg. Just shortly after the siege, the water begins to recede, catching the attention of the giant spider. From the ocean comes Godzilla, and he roars, catching the attention of the spider, who immediately goes on the offensive. Godzilla makes short work of the spider as he grabs it by the front two pincers and burns off its face using atomic breath. Godzilla begins to pack the egg under sand and proceeds further into the island. On the other side of the island, the Behemoth Titan makes landfall, and upon its arrival, other smaller creatures begin to flee. As it gets further into the island, you hear a loud and familiar roar of Kong. Leaping through the forest and out into the open arrives Kong, clearly much larger than we remember him, but also still much smaller than the Behemoth. Kong and the Behemoth begin to charge each other, and the Behemoth launches Kong several hundred yards away with the side of its tusk, very similar to a shoulder tackle. So he kind of like knocks him back with the side of his tusk. Kong gets up and realizes he cannot outmuscle the Behemoth. He picks up a boulder and chucks it at the Behemoth, but the Behemoth knocks it away with his tusk. Kong then utilizes his speed to jump on the Behemoth's back and begins to ground and pound, laying punches on his side and his head. The multiple bludgeons bring the Behemoth down a peg to what would be his knees. Kong grabs one side of the tusk and bends it and the Behemoth's head so far back that the large tusk breaks off. Kong stands on the Behemoth's back, and just then we hear Godzilla's roar. Kong's facial expression indicates he recognizes the roar and jumps off the Behemoth, and the Behemoth begins to slog away heading for the water. Godzilla appears and him and Kong face off. Kong beats his chest and roars. Godzilla begins flashing his dorsal plates and roars. Kong then charges Godzilla, and they are in what is similar to a wrestling lock, hands on each other's shoulders, doing a sort of tug of war. Godzilla lunges and bites down on Kong's shoulder, and Kong screams in pain. Just then, Godzilla spins around and catches Kong with a tail whip, launching Kong back. Kong is on the floor and slowly begins to get up as Godzilla revs up for an atomic blast. Just then, Kong grabs a tree and tosses it in Godzilla's mouth just before the blast fires, stunning Godzilla as the base of the tree catches Godzilla's throat. Kong lunges, grabs the tree, and keeps it in Godzilla's mouth, forcing him to the ground. Kong begins to ground and pound Godzilla on the chest. Just then, Godzilla inhales atomic breath, burning the tree, then expulses it, burning Kong's hands through the atomic pulse. Kong backs up in pain, and Godzilla shoots a much less powerful, but faster, less telegraphed atomic blast, hitting Kong in the chest. Kong's chest is burnt and smoky, and before Godzilla can continue, Kong leaps into the forest and retreats. Godzilla begins to drink some water, in which can be seen as him soothing his throat. The rest of the Titans arrive and begin to make the island their new habitat. Godzilla continues to stay close to the coastline, keeping guard of the Mothra egg. We later see Kong in solitude, grabbing leaves and herbs, crushing them down, and placing them on his wounds. Just then, a large quake hits the island, and a large sinkhole opens near Kong. He investigates it, and an expression of concern is seen on his face. After some human interaction and plot progression, that's a filler for me to say that later on, I'll insert something there, we are back with Kong, and he is scouting the Titans. It is learned that Kong is not happy with the hostile takeover, but realizes fighting each Titan is a waste on his energy, and that he only needs to defeat Godzilla to rid the island of its unwelcome guest. This is learned from the human scientist and with a new, less hostile Orca device. Kong finally sees Godzilla on the coast drinking water and eating loads of fish in one swoop with his mouth. Keeping his distance and waiting for Godzilla to get closer, he waits quietly and patiently in the trees. As Godzilla moves closer, he sniffs out Kong, but it's too late, as Kong jumps on his back and takes a clean shot at Godzilla's head. Knocking Godzilla down, he then bites and rips off one of Godzilla's dorsal plates. He grabs Godzilla by the tail and flings him into the dense forest where there are larger trees. Kong takes cover in the trees and utilizes his speed to make strike attacks. My cat's on the counter. Make strike attacks on Godzilla. Confusing and hurting Godzilla, Godzilla begins to burn down the forest in an attempt to cut down on the stealth attacks. This works as Kong is angered by Godzilla destroying the forest, and he makes the mistake again of taking Godzilla head on. The two go at it in a violent brawl that brings down trees. Kong's rage, combined with Godzilla being weak by the surprise attack, forced Godzilla to retreat into the ocean. Kong has won this round. We cut to Godzilla in the ocean, and he is slowly regenerating his plate. Still staying close to the coast where he buried the Mothra egg, we see Godzilla wake up as he senses danger. The Titan Scylla begins to attack Godzilla. It is learned that after the loss to Kong, the Titan Scylla begins to attack Godzilla. It is learned that after the loss to Kong, the Titans are beginning to sense Godzilla as weak and are now challenging him. Scylla begins to wrap his mouth tentacles around Godzilla's throat. While holding Godzilla underwater, Scylla begins to puncture Godzilla while squeezing the life out of him. Godzilla, going in rage, grabs the base of Scylla's tentacles and rips them right out. Freeing himself, Godzilla brings Scylla to the surface, where he begins to use Scylla as an example to the other Titans. He breaks off several of Scylla's limbs, and while Scylla lays there, Godzilla revs up a powerful atomic blast, utterly incinerating Scylla. This regains control and order. Kong witnesses this battle and realizes that if he can beat Godzilla again, the Titans may just finish him off and eventually leave without any Alpha to guide them. More earthquakes hit the island and a volcano erupts. The humans are staying away now and have been in idle position as Godzilla has stayed too close to the Mothra egg in an attempt to guard it. This has left the humans at a distance as well as the terrorists, both in idle position but ready to fight over the egg when an opening happens. Mark Russell believes they should leave and allow things to happen naturally, that the terrorists have no chance of getting the egg with Kong and Godzilla surrounding the area. Godzilla finally emerges from the sea, fully healed, and makes landfall. Knowing that something is wrong on the island, he begins to head inland. Just then, Kong once again leaps out from the forest, but this time Godzilla is prepared. Godzilla catches Kong in mid-flight with a devastating tail whip that knocks the wind out of Kong. Godzilla grabs Kong's legs with his mouth and bites down hard and drags him out into the open to keep him away from the forest and any more sneak attacks. Kong tries to get Godzilla's vice grip off his leg, but Godzilla is all in. Kong desperately gives Godzilla a solid punch to the snout, stunning Godzilla as he falls back. Kong tackles Godzilla to the floor and gives him several hard punches to the face and one solid punch to the throat. Godzilla wrestles Kong off of him and gets to his feet. Just then, Kong jumps on Godzilla's back again, looking to rip another dorsal plate, but this time, Godzilla sends a surge up his back and burns Kong's hands again. While this is happening, a firefight breaks out on the beach as the terrorists and Monarch try to retrieve the egg. The Chen sisters begin to hum a hymn, and the egg begins to hatch. Back to the fight, Godzilla finally has the upper hand and begins to pound on Kong. Shoving his head into a large boulder, Kong is on the ground looking exhausted. Godzilla places his foot on Kong's chest and begins to charge up a large atomic breath. But just then, a large sinkhole opens up and smoke and some molten lava begin to seep out. Out comes a huge skullcrawler, a much evolved one with 4 legs instead of 2. Godzilla begins to back off of Kong and sets its sight on the skullcrawler, which is larger than Godzilla. The skullcrawler lunges at Godzilla and wraps his large and long tail around his body, constricting him. It begins to bite down on Godzilla's neck and chest, drawing blood and injuring Godzilla. The skullcrawler begins to ascend his head, looking right down at Godzilla, opening his mouth large, and it expands and a second mouth is revealed, much like Alien. And just as it is about to deliver the finishing blow, Kong swings in off a nearby branch and kicks the skullcrawler, freeing Godzilla. The meta skullcrawler is knocked on the ground. Godzilla gets up and peers at Kong as Kong peers back. They growl at each other. Kong beats his chest at Godzilla, and Godzilla roars. Godzilla surges atomic energy up his back, and sizes up Kong. They're about to go at it again and finish their fight, but just then, they both turn and charge the skullcrawler as the skullcrawler charges back, and an epic battle ensues. Godzilla tanking the crawler while Kong uses his speed to deliver quick and decisive blows. But the skullcrawler successfully fights them off. Just then, the remaining Titans scattered about the island begin to converge toward the fight. The Mothra egg finally hatches and triplets are revealed. They begin to head toward the fight. Godzilla and Kong are struggling and losing the fight, and the skullcrawler is about to finish them both when suddenly Silk begins to fly in midair and land on the skullcrawler. Just as it's about to attack, the skullcrawler turns its attention to a Mothra larva hiding behind a rock. Just as it's about to attack, Silk flies from a different direction. Suddenly, the triplets are beginning to bind the skullcrawler from all directions. The rest of the Titans arrive, and Godzilla, Kong, and the Titans begin taking free shots at the skullcrawler. Finally, Godzilla stands in front of a bound meta skullcrawler. Kong then grabs the skullcrawler by the mouth and begins to open its jaw. Just as he is doing that, Godzilla blasts an atomic breath down its throat, ripping the head off. Kong, with the head in its hand, tosses it into the ocean. The monsters go their separate ways, and Godzilla and Kong stare at each other down. Kong giving a nudge but not bowing, and Godzilla placing his foot atop the dead skullcrawler and blasting atomic breath into the air. Kong watches and walks away, and Godzilla returns to the sea. End credits paper clippings. At the end, explain that while Kong will not submit to Godzilla, he lives with all the Titans on Skull Island, which is now dubbed Monster Island. The Mothra triplets can be seen, as well as the remaining Titans. Godzilla returns to live in the seas, as while Kong will not submit to Godzilla, Godzilla will not live under the rule of Kong. An understanding is placed between the two, and a ceasefire, for lack of a better term, so to speak. Godzilla will only return to answer to any threat and unbalance in the world. While the Titans are still answering to Godzilla, they will live with respect to Kong on the new Monster Island. End credits scene showed Jonah Allen taking Ghidorah's DNA and inserting it into a small crustacean, saying, "This tiny animal was the only survivor from the oxygen destroyer blast and has mutated." Several crustaceans are inserted with the DNA of King Ghidorah, and the results show that the crustaceans can now attach together to form a larger crustacean, and just as well detach to form smaller ones. End movie.
Thank you for watching E.T.N. Click here to watch more content. Don't forget to leave a comment. Also, make sure you like and share this video. If you want to know when the next video is up, click the notification bell next to the subscribe button. And most of all, make sure to click that subscribe button for regular content.